Visit from a Vampire. Part 2. The days following Nathan's encounter with Lily felt like a blur. Life carried on as usual, fixing computers at the shop, feeling stuck in a job that was mindless but necessary. He was good at hacking, but in a world slowly overtaken by AI, job prospects for programmers were shrinking fast. So there he was, at the repair shop, lost in thought, haunted by the surreal memory of that night. He tried to shake it off, but it gnawed at him. Every now and then, while talking to a customer, his mind would drift. His boss had to nudge him back to reality more than once. One evening, after a particularly slow day, Nathan decided to stop by his favorite spot, a cozy little restaurant that served the best creamy chicken Alfredo in town. As he sat at a corner table waiting for his order, he couldn't help but replay that night in his mind. The cold air, Lily's eyes, the mystery that hung over her like a shadow. His thoughts were abruptly interrupted when someone slid into the seat across from him. His heart jumped and he looked up. It was Lily. She looked effortlessly stunning, just like the last time. Her raven black hair flowed down her shoulders, slightly wavy and glossy as if it had been styled without a second thought. She wore a thick-fitted winter coat over a cozy turtleneck, paired with dark jeans and stylish boots, just like any normal girl braving the winter chill. But there was something about her, an air of danger that she couldn't completely hide, no matter how ordinary she tried to appear. Her eyes, dark and intense, gleamed with a playful spark, and her full lips curled into a mischievous smile. "Hey, stranger," she greeted him, as though they were old friends. Nathan blinked, caught off guard by how casually she greeted him. Lily. "Hey." She smiled warmly, her fangs slightly visible. She ordered a drink, not even glancing at the menu, but didn't touch it once it arrived. Instead, her eyes stayed fixed on Nathan, observing him closely, amused. "So," she began, leaning in slightly, "what have you been up to these last few days?" Nathan shifted in his seat, his mind racing. "Oh, you know, the usual. Work, fixing computers. It's been, well, kind of boring compared to that night." Lily chuckled softly. "I tend to have that effect on people." He smiled awkwardly, but there was a truth in her words that unsettled him. They continued chatting, the conversation light but easy. For a vampire, she seemed effortlessly in tune with the world around her, using modern slang and making jokes like anyone else. It was almost enough to make him forget the dangerous aura that always seemed to surround her. Almost. After a while, Nathan grew quiet, his thoughts churning with questions. He cleared his throat, suddenly nervous. "Can I ask you something?" he asked cautiously. Lily arched a brow, intrigued. "Of course." "Do vampires really need blood to survive?" Her gaze never wavered as she leaned back in her chair, a small, amused smile playing on her lips. "Yes," she said, as if the question were as ordinary as asking about the weather. Nathan swallowed hard, his heart beating faster. "And how do you get it?" For a moment there was silence. Then her smile widened into something more sinister, her eyes glinting with mischief. She leaned across the table, her voice lowering as she said, "Why don't I show you?" Before he could protest, she reached across, grabbing his wrist with surprising strength and pulling him up from his seat. His pulse quickened as she guided him toward the door. "Wait, we haven't paid yet," he stammered, glancing back at the table. Lily shrugged with a grin. "We'll take care of that later." And with that, they slipped out of the restaurant, the night air cool and crisp against Nathan's skin as he wondered what exactly he had just gotten himself into. Ethan's heart raced as he found himself being dragged by Lily deeper into the underbelly of the city. The air thickened with the stench of decay, desperation, and crime. Shadows moved along the cracked walls of the towering buildings around them, and every step felt like it was bringing them closer to something dark, something dangerous. He glanced around nervously as they entered a part of the city he had only ever heard about in hushed whispers, where criminals, drug dealers, and worse crawled the streets like cockroaches. Lily seemed unfazed. Her lips curved into a subtle smile, as if this were just another evening stroll. Ethan felt out of place, and judging by the way the men around them stared, they definitely stood out. Dressed like any normal 20-somethings, they were prey in a jungle of predators. The uneasy glances quickly turned to leers, and it wasn't long before 3 figures detached from the darkness and began following them. Ethan felt a knot form in his stomach. His mind was screaming at him to turn around to run. But Lily, she was enjoying this. "Ah, here they come," she said softly, her voice carrying an unsettling calm. They wandered deeper into the labyrinth of grimy streets, heading towards an isolated alleyway. The air felt heavier now, quieter except for the occasional mutterings of junkies huddled in corners. As they reached the dead end, the looming shadows of their pursuers grew longer. Ethan's breath hitched. His mouth went dry as they turned to face the 3 men closing in on them. The leader of the group, a burly man with a grotesque grin and a scar across his cheek, stepped forward, eyeing them like wolves would a cornered deer. His companions, thinner but no less threatening, stood menacingly behind him. "What are you 2 lovebirds doing in this kind of area?" the leader asked, his voice thick with malice. Ethan opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. His throat tightened in fear as he glanced at Lily, but she gave him no hint of what she was planning. The men looked terrifying, hardened by a life of crime, and Ethan was certain this would end badly. "Are you guys mute?" the leader snarled when no answer came. "Well, it's easy. We're going to take all your money. Then with you, boy, we'll make quick work. But you, girl..." His grin widened into something sickening, his eyes gleaming with depraved joy. "With you, we'll take our time." Heh. Lily stepped forward, her posture shrinking, her expression twisting into one of fear. "Please don't hurt my boyfriend," she whimpered, wrapping her arms around the leader in a desperate embrace. "I'll do anything you ask." The man blinked, clearly not expecting this turn of events. His guard dropped for just a moment, long enough for Lily to strike. Her arms tightened around him like a steel vice, and before he could react, her fangs pierced his neck. His eyes went wide with terror as he realized what was happening, but by then it was too late. He thrashed, trying to break free, but Lily's grip was unrelenting, her strength inhuman. His struggles weakened as she drained him, the life ebbing from his body with every second. Ethan stood frozen, his brain struggling to process the horror unfolding in front of him. This couldn't be real. The 2 other men stood paralyzed, their shock palpable. For a few long seconds they just stared, unable to comprehend the sight of their leader's lifeless body in Lily's embrace. When the realization hit, they turned on their heels and bolted, desperate to escape, but they didn't make it far. Lily dropped the body like a rag doll and, in a blur of movement too fast for Ethan's eyes, vanished after the fleeing men. He was left standing alone, his mind swirling in terror. Then the screams started, blood-curdling, desperate cries for help that were quickly silenced. The alley grew quiet once more, and the only sound was Ethan's ragged breathing. His heart pounded in his chest as he stared down at the body of the man Lily had drained, his skin pale, lifeless. A slow, deliberate sound of footsteps echoed in the alley. Ethan turned to see Lily emerging from the darkness, walking towards him with the same casual grace she had when they entered the alley. Her face and mouth were smeared with blood, but her expression was light and carefree, as if she had just finished a casual meal. "Just another day in the office of a vampire," she said with a playful smile, her tone disturbingly nonchalant. She wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, smearing more of the blood across her face. "Now you know how I get my blood." Ethan couldn't speak. His body felt cold, his legs weak. She smiled at him, completely unaware, or perhaps unconcerned with the terror that gripped him. "Well, she continued. "This is a dangerous place. I better walk you home." She paused, as if remembering something. "Oh, and we better not forget to pay when we pass by the restaurant." Ethan nodded numbly, too shaken to argue. He followed her out of the alley, the sounds of the city buzzing faintly around them, but all he could focus on was the image of her blood-stained face and the horror he had just witnessed. They walked in silence, the tension thick between them, and though they passed through the city streets, it was as though a wall now stood between them. Ethan had seen something he couldn't unsee, and as they made their way back to safety, the image of her cold, deadly smile was burned into his mind. That's all for tonight. If you enjoy my bedtime stories, please like and subscribe to my channel. Thank you for joining me tonight.